my family's path or journey, whatever you call it, was dramatically changed about 3 years ago. Um, I can still remember the day where my mind clicked and I just knew that this wasn't normal. This that my son's behavior, that he needed help, and it was scary and it was nerve-wracking and it was something that I had like maybe avoided. Like, I knew something had been going on, but it was just that day was like, okay, no, I can't make excuses anymore. This was the final thing that said, yes, you need to ask someone what's going on. So we were homeschooling at the time, and my oldest son, Digger, was about 6 years old. He's in kindergarten, so he's like 5 or 6. And we were upstairs in the schoolroom, and I remember we were doing math, and we had started with the hands-on learning lesson, and then he was to sit down and do his worksheet. It was easy. It was kindergarten math, and he had understood the lesson, but he was mad. He did not want to sit down and do his worksheet. He wanted to come and play with Mom. He was mad that I was playing with his little brother, and he didn't like that at all. And so I tried to calm him down. I tried to tell him, you do understand this, and I explained what we had just done, and it's like, I don't understand it. I don't know what I'm doing. He was just so mad and so very adamant that he did not want to do this. And I knew he understood it, and there was no reason why he should be so upset and violent. And he was throwing things and kicking and screaming, and I couldn't calm him down. No matter what I did, I could not calm him down. And I had no idea what was going on. He'd had fits before, but this was by far the longest lasting and the most dramatic one that he'd ever had. And I removed his brother from the room because I didn't feel that it was safe, and I also removed myself from the room because everything that I did made him worse. And so I was just like, okay, well, I need him to calm down. I'll just, remove everything away, made sure he was safe, and let him try to calm down by himself. And I remember going downstairs and was very upset. I was crying, and I called my husband, and I told him, I was like, this is not okay. I said, this isn't normal. I said, we need to figure out what's going on. And that was hard. And I remember that he had a really good boss, because after making phone calls, I finally figured out where we needed to go, and they did evaluations only on one day, and you had to come during the day, and his boss let him get off for work. And I took Digger with me, and my husband stayed home with our younger son at the time. And I remember the drive there. It was 45 minutes away from where we lived. It was such a long drive for me, just because I knew what we were doing, and I knew that I'd either have answers or I would have no answers, or they would tell me, you're a failure, you did this to your kid, why can't you control your kid, what's wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with him. Like, all of these crazy thoughts were in my head, and Satan was really attacking me that day, and I just felt horrible, and I just felt like, I just didn't know what to think or anything. And he enjoyed the car ride. He loves car rides, he always has, and he just, was in a good mood, and we pulled in and finally found where we were going. And I remember I sat there, and I didn't want to go inside. I knew I had to go inside, and I needed to compose myself before I went inside. Just took a big breath and let it out. And Digger, I think he was like, what's going on? And he asked me, he said, Mommy, why are we here? Where are we? And I just, I told him where we were, and I didn't know what to tell him why we were there, because I didn't want to say, I was afraid that all he would hear was, we're here because you're being naughty and something's wrong with you, and these people are going to help me fix it. Like, that's not what I wanted him to hear, and I didn't know what to say for him not to hear that. I think I told him that we were just here to talk to them about why he was getting so upset and see if they could help him. And we went inside. I had to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and they had a waiting room where he could sit down, and he tried to run through the hallway, and I remember I had to catch him and bring him back and try to occupy him and fill out papers at the same time. And it was just really stressful. And then I remember it was our turn to go back, and John called us back there, and we went into his office, and he explained to Digger that there were certain toys he could play with, and he needed to ask first, one thing at a time, simple rules. And so I remember that he got out some toys, and then I just sat there and talked with John, and he asked me question after question, about Digger, about his behavior, about his medical history, which he had a lot of medical history, and about family history, and a whole bunch of questions. Crazy questions. Some I didn't even know why they were asking me these questions, and I just felt like it was an hour or more of questions. And then we got to where we were talking about Digger's behavior, and he got a little uncomfortable, and he still to this day does not like people to talk about him at all. Like, he's not home right now, or this wouldn't be happening. But he got really uncomfortable, and I remember he was on the floor, he had a bunch of toys, and he started banging them together, and I just kind of told him, we don't need to do that, you're going to break the toys. And so then he started throwing himself, his whole body, like flailing it onto the couch over and over and over, and just laughing. And I'd never seen him do that before, and the therapist kind of triggered a thought in his, in his mind, and he looked at me and asked if there were any other kind of behaviors that were similar to that Digger did. And I said, well, he will smack himself in the head repeatedly. When he gets in trouble, when he's upset, he'll just sit there and, smack himself in the head. And he liked to bury himself in pillows, and he liked to, he would fling his arms around sometimes. There were a few things like that, and I told him, and he said, he just kind of looked at me, and he said, have you ever thought of Asperger's? And I don't even know how to explain to you what happened inside me. I guess to explain, when Digger was a baby, I was going through school to get my bachelor's, and I was studying child development, and I had seen signs of autism, and I had mentioned to my pediatrician over and over about tantrums, about lining cars up, and just kind of, said, these are the things he's doing. And I remember the nurses mainly, they looked at me as a young mom, my first child, and they just said, are you sure that it's not normal 2-year-old behavior, 3-year-old behavior, 4-year-old behavior, 5-year-old behavior, year after year? They said this to me. And as a young mom, my first child, I had babysat, but I wasn't, around a bunch of kids his age all the time. And so I was like, well, it might be. I said, and so I just brushed it all off. And for him to sit there and have him say it to me before I said anything. I didn't mention autism. I didn't mention Asperger's. Because I thought that I was making it up. I thought that there's no way, that this could be happening. And for him to say that to me, there was relief, but then there was also all of these things like, you knew, why didn't you push it? Why didn't you get him help sooner? All of these things. And then there were the things that, since I had studied it, I knew what that meant. So then there were all these questions, all these thoughts. Well, how is he going to do this? How's he going to grow up? How's he going to, just my brain exploded with thoughts and emotions on all different sides of the scale. And I just was like, okay. And so I said, well, I have thought of that, and I told him about my degree and that I'd seen things and kind of told him my experience. And he said, well, I think you should have him evaluated. He said he can start seeing a therapist through us, and we can diagnose him, but he said that there is a specialty place that we could go where a lot of people go to get an official diagnosis, and that he recommended that we do that. So I started that process. At that time, there was a 6-month to 1-year wait list to get evaluated, to get in and be seen. And so I started that process, and I think we got in quicker than normal. We only had a 3-month wait, and we got in August. And I remember we went there, and it was an 8-hour day. We had a 4-hour medical examination in the morning. We had a 4-hour behavioral examination in the afternoon. Since he was older, I don't know if they don't typically do both, but So we were there with just him all day long, me and my husband, and answering questions. And they did some testing. And I remember we could see through the little mirror, just like they have at the police station, you see on TV or whatever. And I could see in, and Digger couldn't see us. And he did not like being in there by himself. And the person evaluating him didn't give him any structure. And I was kind of like, what are you doing? But they had already looked at all of the structure that I had given Digger at home, homeschooling him, and then just with my psychology background, I had made him picture schedules, I had made him, things about emotions and social stories, and I had a whole bunch of stuff already set up for him, especially once I found out that he possibly had autism. I really threw myself into that and looked up all of these different resources and things that I could do to help him. And so they wanted to see how he was without any of that structure, and he was a mess. And I was a crazy mom, and I was like, what are you doing? Why are you letting my kid climb the walls, jump off the chair, and just go crazy? But at the end of the day, they ended up, they gave us a diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And part of what they did when they were doing the IQ test was, it was funny for me. God kind of used me seeing the IQ test and how Damien behaved, because I had, in my schooling, I was very against an ADHD diagnosis, because to me it's overly diagnosed, too easily diagnosed and said. And I had a teacher who was a psychometrician, and she said that if a child cannot sit through an IQ test, they have ADHD, and that is the main draw factor. Like, there's a lot of things that make kids hyper and not be able to pay attention, but if they truly have ADHD, they can't sit through an IQ test. And I had just watched my son not be able to sit through an IQ test, and so that was, I think, to me, that was God saying he knew that's what I needed to see in order to accept that diagnosis. And they did tell us that he probably would have been Asperger's, but they had just taken Asperger's away, so he was just placed on the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. And, they gave us some resources and some ideas of things to do. So that's kind of where we started our journey. And I would love to hear everybody's experience of when the first diagnosis was, if you have more than one in your family, or if you just have one, just what day do you remember when it all changed? Because that's what it was. And not that it was bad, because I wouldn't change my son for the world. He teaches me new and wonderful things every single day by the way he sees the world, and I love that about him. But just to be in that place of not knowing what's going on, and just as a mother to feel like you're failing, it's really hard. And I think that through sharing our stories with one another, it helps build each other up. It helps us learn from each other. It helps moms who are going through that right now say, oh my goodness, I need to listen to my heart. I need to listen to my mommy intuition, and I need to get this figured out. I need to push harder. And that is one thing, any woman who ever comes to me about their children and they say, I think this is going on, but the doctor, says this. I look at them and I say, you are their mom. You know them better. I said, if you think something is going on, I said, you keep pushing. You keep saying something until they figure it out, or until they say definitely no. And that is always my advice now, because that was hard for me. Because my son then was 6 when he was diagnosed, and with autism, they like them diagnosed as young as they can be. A lot of times when they start school is when some of them get caught, especially higher functioning. But the fact that I knew when he was 2 and I didn't push it, that was hard for me. And I think as a mom, that's always hard. And you can't go back and change it, and you can't, you don't want to be that person who's always like, oh, something's wrong with my kid every single time. But if your heart is telling you that something isn't going on, listen to that. Listen to your mommy intuition, and just keep trying and keep going. But leave messages in the comments if you want to email me. You can contact me for my email, and I'll send it out to you. I have a blog at hebringsjoy.com, and I am looking forward to building it up and adding some more stuff to it, but you can find me there as well. You guys have a good day. Thanks for listening.